Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hello and welcome to Therapeutic Approaches to Dealing with Pandemic Stress from the Quran. This is a program provided by Being Me. We would like to start today's program with a Quran recitation by Rabia Zia. Rabia is a Quran teacher and have completed her master's in Islamic Studies and Ta'lim al-Quran course from Al-Huda International. Assalamu alaikum, Rabia. How are you?
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair for having me.
Go ahead.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سورة الليل والليل إذا يغشى والنهار إذا تجلى وما خلق الذكر والأنثى إن سعيكم لشتى فأما من أعطى واتقى وصدق بالحسنى فسنيسره لليسرى وأما من بخل واستغنى وكذب بالحسنى فسنيسره للعسرى. Reading the translation now. In the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most gracious, the most merciful. By the night as it envelops, by the day as it appears in brightness. By him who created male and female. Certainly, your efforts and deeds are diverse, different in aims and purposes. As for him who gives in charity and keeps his duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fears him, and believes in al-husna, the good deeds, we will make smooth for him the path of ease, goodness. But he who is greedy, miser, and thinks himself self-sufficient and belies al-husna, the good deeds, we will make smooth for him the path for evil. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you, Rabia. Thank you very much for the recitation. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. And please make sure that if you have any questions, you can write your questions down under the comment section on Facebook Live, and our speaker will take those questions at the end of her session. So we'll begin today the session with our speaker, inshallah. Our speaker is Asma Ali. She is a registered psychotherapist in Ontario and certified Islamic counselor at Elif Institute UK. She holds a BA, EBD, MA in education and MA in counseling psychology. She is the founder of a Concentric Care Wellness Services and a psychotherapy practicing for 8 years. We're very happy to have Asma here with us today. Thank you, Asma, for being here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead with your presentation, inshallah.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I was asked to talk about pandemic stress and also to talk about how the Quran may help us with pandemic stress. And I think that it can. So what I'm going to be talking about is what pandemic stress is, what's being recommended to treat pandemic stress, also why that may not be working, like why it's continuing for some people, and then what I think is the real solution to pandemic stress, which is actually a physical, mental, and emotional phenomenon. So let's look at what pandemic stress is. Think about what you've been going through. What have you been experiencing during this difficult time? Since the pandemic began, have you been experiencing things like more fatigue or irritability, like a short fuse with people, or difficulty focusing and concentrating, or feelings of sadness or loneliness? Have you been feeling any of these? Think about whether or not this applies to you. These feelings may well be associated with the pandemic, and some people are not sure about that because they may already have some of those feelings, but for some, they are coming up more so now than before March of 2020. and they're not sure why. There are several reasons for this. Like one of them is that we're continuing to function and adjust despite these difficult circumstances. Another is that we just don't know what like stress is, like what actual stress is, and we don't know what a bit of fatigue is. So it's difficult to determine like whether or not we're actually experiencing pandemic stress. So I think that we are, and that's because of the significant change that we've all undergone, and it's constant change. It's not just because of like lockdowns at the beginning, but it's constant lockdowns and adjustments and so on. And then it's working from home versus working from work. It's having children at home. It's all of these things. So I think that we are experiencing pandemic stress and even some pandemic burnout. And this is for several reasons. So one of them is that people are constantly worried and fearful about how to deal with the virus itself, like the threat of the virus, how to adjust to life, and also how to deal with the uncertainty, like not knowing what's coming. Another reason is that our bodies are actually constantly kind of ramping up into this mode that we get into when we're trying to deal with a threat, which is like, we call it in psychotherapy fight or flight mode. So when we're in that mode, we get symptoms like tension, sweatiness, shortness of breath. That's very common. And those symptoms actually serve us well when there's a real threat because they take us out of danger. But when the threat has gone away, we actually feel calmer, like, the symptoms go down and we feel more calm and we get on with our day. But with this pandemic, it's this invisible threat that's out there that we're all constantly like trying to protect ourselves from. And in that process of constantly trying to protect ourselves, we are ramping up into fight or flight mode. So I argue that we're like constantly in that mode, and that part of our body, our system that's made to like protect us is in overdrive. And that actually leads to anxiety, but also leads to things like inflammation, like people are getting breakouts that they don't normally get, or they're like, for example, experiencing more indigestion than usual. So there are these symptoms that are coming up because of this state that we're in. And also, we're being triggered or affected by the people around us who are experiencing these things. So like if people in our families or at work or children, for example, are more anxious than usual in the ways that I just described, we may be feeding off of that and experiencing some of that with them. So for all of these reasons, I think that we are experiencing increased stress, increased anxiety, and with that, excessive fatigue and even burnout. And that's something that people are just trying to come to terms with now, like 8 months in. Okay. So to deal with this, experts are recommending a number of things, and I recommend these things. Okay. I recommend things like exercise. Exercise is excellent for de-stressing, bringing more oxygen into the body, relaxing the mind, and shifting the focus of the mind. So exercise is excellent. Another thing is doing breathing techniques, which are always highly recommended by therapists, but few people actually do. So if that's one of the things that a therapist or someone's recommended for you, I recommend it now again. Another thing to do is to cut back on news and screen time and only look at what it is that you can control. Like, for example, if you need to know news about your children's school, or if you need to know news about lockdowns in Canada, or you need to know news about your homeland, then understandable. But if you're reading and watching news that increases worry and anxiety, that may not be the best thing to do right now. Another one is picking up like a lot of new habits or hobbies. Some people think that that's like a solution for anxiety, but it can actually increase anxiety because it fills the mind with more things to do and think about. And anxiety is funny that way. Like anxiety it comes from worry, right? Excessive worry. And worrying is a habit. So when the mind gets into the habit of worrying, and develops the resulting anxiety, which is a physical phenomenon. It happens in the body as symptoms. The mind then wants to worry about other things because it becomes a habit. So when one stressor goes away or one source of worry goes away, the mind then feels a little bit calmer, but then it looks for another thing to worry about. So if you're thinking that filling your mind with other new things may be a solution, it may not be. Another thing is spending time in nature. I think that really helps to calm the mind, to refocus, to focus on what's important, which we'll talk about today. I also recommend a few things. One of them is to notice what you're missing from before. So a lot of us left situations before the pandemic, whether it's work or like free time at home or a bit of free time if you have kids, or it's like leaving one place and going to another. And in that process, we lost some of the emotional and spiritual energy that we had. Like the places and the things that we used to do or be in would give us a lift. They would give us emotional and spiritual energy. And now we've lost that, and we're trying to make it through this long road without that emotional spirit and spiritual energy. So it's so important to remember that you've lost that energy, like the people you used to see, going to the mosque, being in environments that stimulated your thinking, and so on. And if you have lost that energy, find ways to rejuvenate that energy. Don't just replace it with something else, but rejuvenate that energy. And it can be by having like rekindling the same relationships as before, or finding ways to bring that back into your life now. Okay. Another piece of advice is to create room for change in your life. Like when the pandemic started, a lot of us just kind of quickly adjusted, didn't we, to all of the things that happened. And it's been constant adjustment since. Now, normally when we're going to adjust to something so massive, like locking down your whole life, what we actually do is we plan for it, don't we? We have like a 6-month plan for a lockdown if we knew that we were going into a lockdown, or a 10-month plan for keeping your child at home from school. But now all of a sudden it's like boom, 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 boom. Like we've made all of these sudden adjustments without room to process, without room to breathe, without room to like help other people around us breathe or plan for it, which all of us need. So the solution is to start creating room in your life for change. If you haven't been doing that, it's okay. Like if you've been pushing yourself to achieve things at the same pace, or if you've been harder on your kids to do certain things, start to step back and create some room for that person or for yourself to adjust to these massive, massive changes that have happened. So create room for change and be forgiving towards yourself and forgiving towards others. Be more so than less so. And then a final piece of advice, very Western psychotherapeutic advice, is to protect what brings you real rest. Now, as I mentioned before, what people are sometimes doing now is going to things like new hobbies or like new sports for rest. And these can be restful, but they can also fill the mind with like lots of information and new things to process and new sources of stimulation. Now, when the mind is active, like for example, you know this, like if you're going to bed at night and your mind is active, can you really rest? You can't. Your mind has to stop being active to rest. So do things that cause the mind to be at rest. You're not using the mind for things, and then the body will be at rest, and then you'll get more real rest is what I call it. So those are some psychotherapeutic advices on how to deal with this. I wonder if the moderator has any questions or points at this time.
Thank you very much for providing those tips, Asma. I do have some questions that we have received from our audience when we made the post. I also encourage our audience that are watching us right now live on Facebook to please ask your questions, write them down under the comment section on Facebook, and Asma will answer those questions.
I have the second half of my presentation.
Okay.
So I just wanted to stop here and ask if anyone has any questions in the interim.
Okay. So we haven't received any questions from anyone yet. However, you can continue with your presentation, and then inshallah we'll go with the last session.
Okay, cool. So, you know, despite the efforts I mentioned, like exercise, walking, resting more, people are still complaining that there's a problem. Like, and the problem is the uncertainty. Like, we just don't know when this is going to end, and we don't know what's going to change as a result of it. Isn't that right? So even though you've been trying the walking and trying the spending time with family and trying the eating better, there's still this anxiety and tension that we're feeling inside of ourselves, and that's in the air. And I argue that that's because of the uncertainty of the situation. We're just not used to uncertainty. We're just not used to not having control over our circumstances. Isn't that right? Like, our society, even our education, like how we were raised, it programmed us to learn to, especially in North America and Europe and so on, in more well-off countries, so to speak, like to have control of our circumstances. And when we don't, we really get flustered. Like, we feel lost. We feel like very anxious, you know? And in fact, that lack of control is really what anxiety is all about. I talked about how worry comes from, anxiety comes from excessive worry. That worry tends to be about what we don't know, like the things that we don't know. So the more we don't know, or the more we don't know about what's coming, is the more that worry increases, and the more the anxiety increases. So how do we deal with uncertainty? This is the question. You know, the constant uncertainty is leading to this cycle of worry, anxiety, fatigue, and irritability. You know, worry, anxiety, fatigue, and irritability. And that's causing people to, you know, increase in worry gradually and increase in anxiety gradually. And it's having an impact on them and others. Can you relate to that? Is that something that's happening for you? So, despite solid efforts, people are fixated on a couple of questions. When will this end? And what will I lose? We're fixated on uncertainty and being uncomfortable about when this will end and when we'll be able to return to life as we knew it. And we're fixated on what we might lose, like a fear of loss. Okay, is that true for you? Do you think that might be affecting you? So in this session, the second half, I'm inviting you to take a step back, a big step back, and look at what your mind is focused on. Notice the problems that may be preoccupying you. Are you focused on finding answers in the uncertainty? And are you focused on your fear of loss? Are those affecting you at a non-conscious and a conscious level? Now, what if you, what we call reframing, what if you replaced those problems with a different set of problems? What if you replaced the discomfort with uncertainty and the fear of loss with a different set of problems? What if your mind was preoccupied with a different set of problems, with a different dilemma? Could you possibly see yourself shifting away from the focus on the uncertainty and the loss and focusing on something else? And what if the uncertainty of the pandemic is exactly here for that? What if all of this uncertainty and fear of loss, which is everywhere now, has come up so that we could feel squeezed or pushed or buried, or like if we're drowning, so that we could start to shift away from this focus on uncertainty, on searching and searching for answers, and start to focus on a different dilemma or a different part of life. Okay? And I think that that's exactly what the pandemic is here for. I think that the pandemic has come to shift our focus away from uncertainty and control and clinging to the real dilemmas of life. So in a way, the pandemic is actually here to heal us and stop us from the fuel of worry and anxiety, and to bring us to a place of peace and calm, to stop the control and the clinging, and to help us to come to a place of peace and calm. It's a healing for us in a way. So I'll talk about that now and how the Quran may actually help us with that. I'm not a scholar of the Quran, and I don't presume to be. I don't work with tafsir, with explanations of the Quran, and I don't speak Arabic. So I'm not going to be going into detail about the Quran, but I'm going to be showing you how wonderfully the Quran brings us healing experiences by bringing to light things that shift our focus away from controlling and clinging to the real dilemmas of life. Okay? So, what does the Quran do? It causes us to spend time reflecting, and I'll talk about that. It causes us to learn how to embrace uncertainty, not just deal with uncertainty, actually embrace uncertainty. Okay? It teaches us to reframe our struggles. Like, for example, I can't get through this, or this isn't going to end, or I hate this, or even simpler, like I'm worried about what's going to happen to my job, things like that. And that's not simple, but what I mean by that is those are more common worries. Those are more logical worries. It's logical for someone to worry about what's going to happen with their job or their finances. Okay. It causes us to, and it teaches us how to let go of clinging. Clinging, and by clinging, I mean clinging to things, clinging to control. It teaches us how to focus on the right dilemmas. So away from dilemmas like, when am I going to make this much money? Or dilemmas like, what will happen to my children in 3 years? You know, and it doesn't mean that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the Quran, for God Almighty in the Quran, these aren't important things. However, the Quran teaches us to shift our focus to the more essential dilemmas of life and to keep our focus on that. And then the Quran teaches us to become comfortable with death. And I think that death anxiety, which in the existential frame of psychotherapy is actually one of the essential causes of anxiety, death anxiety has really come up for people through the pandemic. And that's why I argue that I think the pandemic is a healing, because it has brought up death anxiety for us, caused us to confront major questions of life and shift our focus. So I'm going to talk now about how the Quran can do this for you. And what I'm going to do is invite you to go through the Quran and look at the examples that I'm sharing with you. Again, for the reason that I'm not a scholar of the Quran, but also because if I'm talking about the Quran is meant for you to go and benefit from through the teachers, through the tafsir that you choose, not for me as a non-scholar to tell you what to choose and what to interpret. Okay, so let's talk about some ways in which the Quran does this. First, the Quran shows us, not by what's in it, but by its revelation, the importance of contemplation. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may peace and blessings be upon him, he would spend time contemplating, not only when the Quran was revealed, but before the Quran was revealed. It was such a huge part of life. Now, when people retreat, it's like a week vacation. But for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was an enlightened person, a conscious person, retreat was a major part of his day and his life. And when we think of where we are now, we tell ourselves that, I can be busy, my life can be full, my day can be full, because this is what life is about now. And I wonder about that, like, how do we miss retreat in our day-to-day life when it was such a huge part of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life? Have we come that far? I ask myself, have we come that far away from what we believe the prophetic path is? So he would spend time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, reflecting before the Quran was revealed. But then look at this, when the Quran was revealed, It was revealed over a period of how long? You know the answer, I'm sure. 40 years. 40 years for the Quran to be revealed. And in that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent bits and pieces so that He could reform the people. So there were revelations and then reform. Revelations and then reform. What does that tell us about the Quran and how to approach it? It tells us that we need to spend time with it and we need to spend time contemplating it, not only reading a page a day, for example. And this means you can actually spend a bit of time on the Quran or a lot of time on the Quran, but a bit of time may be transformative. So a couple of tips on how to bring the Quran into your life. And this is from a book called Atomic Habits, which a lot of therapists are talking about these days, and I highly recommend. The author's name is James Clear. The book is called Atomic Habits, and you can use it to apply to, you can apply it to any habits you're trying to build. It talks about the change process in a fantastic way. So a couple of tips. One of them is called habit stacking. And this is basically attaching habits to another. So if you're finding difficulty having time to contemplate the Quran, attach the habit of contemplation onto another task in your day. Like, for example, 5 minutes after Fajr, or 5 minutes when you wake up in the morning. Making sure that you attach it to another habit, and by attaching it, by linking it, you remember better, and you also remind yourself that it's not that difficult. You can actually get it done along with another task. Another tip for bringing more of the contemplation into your life is to create an environment for it. So Clear talks about this. He talks about the importance of environment in helping you to create new habits. He says that environment is everything, that if you have the right environment to create a new habit, you will then take cues from that environment and it will come to you, well, in my words, almost automatically. So an example is, if you have a space in your house for contemplation or in your room, or if you have a space that you choose outdoors just for contemplation and you call it your contemplation space, then you may actually go to it quicker. So moving along, and I recommend that you check out James Clear's Atomic Habits for that, but moving along on what else the Quran can teach us. Another thing that the Quran teaches us is about how to embrace uncertainty, not just deal with it. I mean, think about this. When you look at the Quran and when you think of the stories in it, do you see examples of prophets who sat contemplating what's going to happen to me in 3 years? Or do you see examples of individuals who were worried about what's going to happen with my finances or this or that? Not that that's not important. However, what the Quran teaches is that these individuals, these prophets, and the examples that we have to follow, they were comfortable with uncertainty. They actually were okay with it. They knew that whatever happens in the future is by the will of Allah, and we have to accept it, even if it was difficult, even if it was difficult. So think of a story in the Quran where there is an example of someone who is struggling with uncertainty. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about it. What is a story in the Quran where there was a prophet, and prophets are the most commonly mentioned, who was really struggling with uncertainty? And the whole story portrays that. So the example I'm thinking of, and I think there are more than one, definitely more than one, is the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr. When he met Khidr, he was walking with his servant and he met Khidr, and Khidr was someone who was sent by Allah, and Allah describes in Surah Al-Kahf that Musa alayhi salam asked Khidr to go along with him. And when he did, Khidr said, what did Khidr tell him that he needed? He told him that he needed patience. He told him that he needed patience, and he asked him if he had enough patience to walk the journey. And Musa insisted that he did. So then Khidr took him on a series of lessons. He took him to um, on a ship, and on the ship, he bore a hole. He took him to a boy, and what happened? The boy was killed. He took him to a town, and where the people like weren't being hospitable to them, he actually repaired a wall. And then when Musa was confused about all of this, he didn't know what was going on. He asked Khidr, what's going on? I can't tell what the meaning of this is. Tell me what this means. It seems so awful. Like that. Khidr explained the reason behind it. The reason behind it. And I think this is a beautiful example of a man who's also a prophet, struggling with uncertainty and having to come to terms with it. But the beautiful thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does for us is He shows us that behind the uncertainty, there was a secret. There was a reality that they couldn't see, that Musa couldn't see. And when that reality was revealed, it was so amazing, you know? Now, reality doesn't always reveal itself to us. The secret behind something, the reason behind something, it doesn't always reveal itself to us. But that wasn't the story. That wasn't the lesson in that story. What were the lessons in that story about Musa and Khidr? It was about Musa's struggle with uncertainty. And it was about the fact that Khidr came and he knew the answer, but he wouldn't tell him. So sometimes things will come in life that cause us to struggle, really struggle with uncertainty. And we will struggle with it. Like we will ask, what's the meaning of this? What's required is patience. And those things, like Khidr was, can be a teacher. They can be a teacher that behind the event or behind the struggle, there is a secret. There is a lesson. There is something. And you can apply this in your day-to-day struggles as well as your big struggles. For example, on a day-to-day basis, do you come across incidents where like something happens, like something falls or a child does something that really annoys you, or you're worried about something happening with school lockdowns, for example, and you become frustrated and you think, I want to know when is this going to happen? Or I want to know why this happened, or why is all of this happening now? So what you can do is reframe that and ask yourself, what may the secret behind this be? Or what may the lesson or the truth behind this be? Now, you may not know the reason. You may not know why Allah brought that into your life, but there is something. And that's on a day-to-day basis. So now when I go through my days, when something goes wrong with my work, like I've been doing a major project, when something goes wrong with it, I say to myself immediately, there's a secret in this. And all I mean by that, I don't mean a mystical thing. I just mean that there's something in this that Allah means to happen, like to happen to me. And also it will reveal itself if I wait. It will reveal itself if I wait, like Khidr. So everything that happens to you in life can be a teacher. And the teacher can tell you, like Khidr did eventually, what the lesson is. But the teacher can also wait to tell you. And maybe you can wait for the teacher to tell you. So another thing that the Quran can do for us is it can reframe our struggles. It can reframe our struggles in the way that I just did. And I want you to think for a moment of a couple of instances in the Quran where we were invited to reframe our struggles, or where a prophet was invited to reframe their struggle. So the most profound, I think, example of this in the Quran is in Surah Al-Mulk, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what translates as, we created life and death to test you, to see which of you is best in conduct. Now, what I've noticed is that a lot of people during this pandemic are preoccupied with worries about things, about the lack of control, about circumstances changing. And what I see in that, as well as in myself, is that the dialogue, the inner dialogue, is this preoccupation, this concern with tangible things, with what's happening in the world, with what's going to happen, you know? And what I'm noticing is that this reframing from Surah Al-Mulk, it's not as present anymore in people's minds, that we created life and death to test you, to see which of you is best in conduct, in character. So it made me wonder, like, why? Why, when we're facing these trials, do our minds start to become preoccupied by what's going to happen and what does this mean for me? And why is Allah testing me in this way? And is He going to take away something I want? Why have our minds become preoccupied with that kind of inner dialogue and not with this dialogue about, we created life and death to test you, to see which of you is best in conduct? And one of the ways to reframe that is to look for the test in each situation. Just look for the test in each situation. Instead of framing it as a thing that's happened to you, a circumstance, frame it as a test. Frame it as a test of your character. And take it one step further and ask yourself the question, what character trait did I show in that moment? Did I show patience? Did I show love? Did I show mercy? Or did I show anger, frustration, and irritability? But the only way to keep this going, of moving from this frame to this frame, is to really go back to the book of essential dilemmas, the Quran. Go back to looking at life through that lens. And it's healing. Okay, a couple more ways in which the Quran brings healing to us and is the healing for us at this time. One of the ways is to let go of clinging. Let go of clinging. Now, again, clinging is what we do when we're holding on to the things that we love or the experiences we love. And I noticed that as the pandemic started and continued, we began to cling. We really began to cling. We began to cling to things like food, like shopping, like becoming frustrated by not seeing the people that we love. That's clinging. It's holding on tight to what we love and what we want. Okay, and it's natural. I mean, where do we cling? Clinging is our first state of being in our mother's wombs. We cling to life. It's natural. Okay, but the Quran teaches us that clinging is actually not the solution to worry and anxiety. The solution to worry and anxiety is letting go of clinging. Okay, letting go of clinging. So the Quran teaches us this in a beautiful example of a woman. Who is that woman? The woman is Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, the mother of Musa. When she had to take Musa alayhi salam, her own baby, and put him in the river by the command of Allah. That is an example of an extreme circumstance, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to put our trust in Him and let go of things that we cling to with the faith that He is going to replace it or give us something in return. Okay? And then another example, or teaching from the Quran is to become comfortable with death. To become comfortable with death. And to go back to Surah Al-Mulk, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we created life and death. Death is a part of life. Death is a part of life. I think in our modern conception of life, we have taken out death. And the reason is because all of modern life is about preserving life, making sure that life is comfortable, making sure that we can cling and we can control, and rooting out death. And for those of us in privileged countries, death, like as it is in other places, is not a normal part of life. So we experience death, but we experience it in a very clean, removed way. We get to choose what funerals we go to. It doesn't invade our homes, but death is a part of life. It's a part of the real life. So become comfortable with death. And the Quran is replete with reminders of this. Now, as a closing, ask yourself a couple of questions. Are you resistant to going back to the Quran? And is it because you feel distant from God, or is it because these questions are uncomfortable questions? Are these dilemmas the dilemmas that you want to be concerned with, like life and death and letting go? Or are the dilemmas of life, like how to renovate, and this is not either um, or how to renovate and how to um, maintain your job or your status or make more money. Are these the dilemmas that you've become preoccupied with? Important question. Important question. Okay, so if you're wanting to cling to these dilemmas and you're not wanting to go to these dilemmas, right? Ask yourself why. Why don't you want to confront the realities of life? And we call that in clinical psychology avoidance and denial. Avoidance and denial. And subhanAllah, Allah talks about both in the Quran, avoidance and denial. So use the pandemic as this brilliant opening where you have been pushed and squeezed and buried and drowning. Use it as a brilliant opening for you to be able to uh, reorient your soul from this place of wanting certainty to this place of being comfortable with uncertainty, being at peace with it. Use it as an opportunity to come to consciousness, to come to an awakening, and not return to that previous pre-pandemic state of clinging and controlling. And those are some words that I wanted to share with you. I ask God Almighty, I ask Allah to make me live these words in a healthy way, in a way that is good for me and good for my ubudiyah, my servanthood to God. So I'll take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you very much, Asma, for that beautiful presentation of yours. Honestly, I was listening throughout the presentation and I'm like, these are some amazing tips. I wish I heard these tips before, or at the beginning of the pandemic. It would have made it so much easier. I do have some questions here that I'm going to start asking you, inshallah. You did provide a lot of tips in, making this easy, making this whole pandemic and the stress that people are having right now easy on them. But if someone was to ask for one tip, just because if they're in so much stress and they want to start this stress, however, they aren't sure where to start, like what to do first, right? If you could provide them one tip that they could start with to make the rest of the whole COVID easy on them, what would you say it would be?
Oh, it really depends on the person. As a clinician, I always wait to know what's going on for the person before I can give one tip.
Mm-hmm.
However, an essential part of healing is to begin to notice what your mind is telling you or saying about a situation. So, for example, are you having thoughts like, this isn't going to end, or something awful is going to happen? I am definitely going to lose a loved one at some point in time. Things are going to be really bad next year. Now, if you're having these thoughts, notice them, because these are extreme thoughts. Things aren't necessarily going to be that bad, and you can't know anyway. So, what I'm suggesting is, if you're having thoughts like this is awful, or this is going to be really bad, or something bad is going to happen, bring yourself back to what's called the middle way. Bring yourself back to a point where you're thinking a more balanced thought. You're in between the worst is going to happen and the best is going to happen. And you're thinking about what's realistically going to happen. And also, what don't I know about the situation yet? What facts don't I have to be able to reach a conclusion?
Great, yes. I do have some questions from Facebook Live that I would like to ask. One person is asking any tips on how to deal with the new life instead of logging into how life was before COVID.
That's a great question.
Yeah, with this whole new normal thing that we're living right now.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad that people are calling it the new normal. So that's the first step. We have to we have to tell ourselves, this is the new normal, and just say this is the normal now. It will be the normal for quite some time, for a few more months at least. What does that mean? And the place to start is to ask yourself, what do you need? And what do the people in your household need? So an example of that is, if you're working from home, but you're finding that you're kind of bumping into people at home, you need more space. If your kids are throwing more, they're experiencing more anxiety and they're becoming more upset, what do they need? Now, the tendency when this happens is to use strategies from before the pandemic. So I'm going to discipline my child in the way that I did before the pandemic. I'm going to create space in my life in the way that I did before the pandemic. But with the new normal, you also need new normal strategies, different strategies. So what is a more appropriate way to discipline my child, given that they are also experiencing anxiety and all of these things? What is space now? So space now may not just mean having an office. It may mean that you need to have an office in the house or a space to work, but you need to actually take a half an hour break from the household every day and go for a walk. So space, discipline, showing affection, all these things we need to redefine them in order to live normally again, okay? But a basic practical step is notice how much space everyone in the household has and try to create space for each person. And it doesn't just mean physical space, it also means mental and emotional space. By mental space, I mean space to process, space to think by themselves, space to be stimulated. By emotional space, I mean perhaps more love and affection or less, time for them to be able to process their emotions. So space doesn't just consist of physical space, it consists of the things in our environment and also time. Space consists of the time that we allow people, the buffer that we allow people.
Exactly, exactly. During this whole pandemic, the stress, we've had different stresses. Sometimes it's social stresses, financial stresses. And someone is asking, how do you deal with job stress, which affects families, just job stress in particular?
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. So I can speak to that from a clinical perspective. One of the things to do is what I mentioned before, like notice the thoughts that you're having. If you're having worried thoughts that are a bit extreme, like I may well lose my job, not that, but I will lose my job, where you don't know yet, or you're having thoughts like we're going to lose all of our money. Now, these aren't realistic thoughts, but they're where the mind goes when it's worried or panicked, okay? So if you're having thoughts like that, bring yourself back to the middle. Think a more balanced, more realistic thought. Ask yourself, what's the reality that this will happen? What are the odds? Or what more facts do I need in order to reach a conclusion about this? Right? So challenge your thinking about your job. Notice if you're thinking extreme thoughts and bring yourself back to a more realistic thought. Even if you don't have all the facts, then acknowledge that you don't have all of the facts to make a conclusion. The second thing you can do from a mental or cognitive perspective is to look at what you're certain of. So I have a number of clients and also family members who are in between spaces in their career, right? Because they're not sure about what to do next, or they hold a business and the business is in some kind of flux or change. So in those cases, what I say is your mind is going to be focused and preoccupied by all of that stress and worry. Remind yourself of what you are certain of in your life. Remind yourself of things like, do you have shelter? Do you have food? Do you have people who love you? Remind yourself that you still have these and ask yourself, how long will I have these for? Like, how long will I have a roof over my head? How long will I have food to eat? Now, in some cases, especially here in Canada where we're so privileged, many of us can say that, yeah, I will have those things. I know that even if I have to downsize my home, I will still have a roof over my head. I know that even if I lose this, I will still have food to eat. And focus on those certainties, because those are what give us strength and security in times of great insecurity and instability. And that will help us mentally. And then the last thing I want to suggest practically is start to talk with your family. Be open with them, with your partner, your family, about your situation. Because sometimes people step in and help us in ways that we would never imagine. And also start to plan with your family about contingencies. Like, what can you do if this doesn't work? Or if you're going to take this step, what can you do as a backup? Be open and honest about those things. And people understand that this is not a normal time. So if you're feeling shy or maybe even a bit of shame because of the situation, everyone understands this is like a radically different time than any time in our lifetime. So people will understand and many people may step in.
Exactly. while this pandemic has affected everyone, some equal, some a lot and some less, but the seniors have been affected a lot by this pandemic because they were targeted more. But so someone is asking here, how do I help my parents who are over 65 years? Is there anything unique for seniors in terms of how they are experiencing this pandemic that you're aware of?
Well, that's interesting. I can base my answer on the seniors in my life. I don't have any senior clients at the moment. And outside of that, I'm quite isolated, as we all are. So I think that just like anyone else, we need to make sure that their basic needs are met and that they're not worried about them. So you might have an open conversation with them about, are you sure, like, for example, your parents, mom, dad, mama, baba, about your rent for the next few months? Are you okay with that? Are you like, do you know that you're going to have food? And even if you know, maybe they need some reassuring, so you can reassure them so that they're not worried about the next couple of years. Okay. Another thing that you can do is actually just talk to them about their anxiety. I've noticed that in some seniors, there's more anxiety and more panic, and that may be because they're not sure of what's coming. So if you can bring experiences into their life that make them feel like things are similar to what they were before, then that may help them. For example, look for opportunities for them to see friends or to see family members, if it's safe to, who they may be isolating from right now because of health, because of COVID, right? Another example is to actually spend quality time with them and doing things that they love, like, for example, going for a walk or whatever it is that they love. These are examples of things that I find reduce their anxiety. One of the things that you can keep in mind about seniors is that they won't necessarily talk about their anxiety. They won't say, I'm worried about this. And that may be for cultural reasons, because in some cultures, it's not normal to talk about your worries and feelings. So you might spark a dialogue with them where you say, for example, I'm worried about this. What do you think? And notice if they're actually worried about their future. Notice if there's something that they're not saying. These are some examples of what I think someone can do to help a senior in your life. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Asma. As I've noticed in myself and the people that I know, that during this pandemic, we've all became very lazy, just for lack of terms, I think, being lazy. And some we lose motivation, right? When we want to, whether it's working out or like praying, reading Quran or like just anything, sometimes you just don't feel like it. Like, I just want to stay in bed. I don't really want to do much. There's really not much to do. That has been the attitude for some people during this lockdown and quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
What are some tips that you could offer people if that they could get motivated to get closer to God, or also to just make Quran part of their daily routine? If you could offer some tips.
Yeah. So that word lazy is like a huge problem for me. I think that I do think that people can get into the habit of being lazy, but I call it a habit. And the reason is because okay, there's lazy, quote unquote lazy, where someone doesn't want to get out of bed or doesn't want to do things, and then there's lazy where someone does it like every day for months. Okay, so I would distinguish between those two types of lazy, and I'm not problematizing anyone who uses the word. Like, it's fine if you use the word, but it's so important to ask where laziness comes from. Laziness is often a form of avoidance. Someone is avoiding something that they don't want to do. So if you're like staying in bed, or if you're not reading the Quran, or if you're doing anything to avoid a situation, ask yourself if you're avoiding it. Ask yourself if you're avoiding something that's coming with that. So I do that in my job all the time. Like, if I notice that I'm putting off a task, or if I'm putting off a chore at home, I ask myself, like, is there something about it that I really don't like? And then I realize that I'm not being lazy, I'm being avoidant. Okay. So then it means changing the experience of that thing. For example, if it's reading the Quran, it may be instead of thinking I'm going to read the Quran for 10 minutes, read it for 2 minutes. Because if you can do the 2 minutes, then it will motivate you to actually do a bit more in future. No pressure, but it will. And then another thing is to change the environment in which you do it. So there are certain, for example, surahs that I read. And when I can't, like I'm really tired at the end of the day and I want to read one of those, then sometimes I put it on YouTube and I listen to it. I listen to it and I read along with it because it motivates me. So by changing the environment, it's not always like changing the place, but it's changing how we do it, how we approach it, making it easier for us. And people think that when I make something easier for me, like whether it's a chore or studies or reading the Quran or praying, if I make it easier for me, it's like slacking off or I'm failing. But what it is actually doing is setting you up for long-term success, because if you can do it even in a small amount today or now, then you will have more motivation to do it later. And we all know that small but consistent actions are much better than big ones that don't last, right? So I hope these are some tips that will help you. I think when it comes to the Quran, what I mentioned earlier is really important. I think that we have all, I mean, I don't know how to put this, but the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have slowly come away from reading the Quran. And then some of us have actually embraced it and learned to love it. So when it comes to the Quran, what I'm suggesting for myself and for others is to learn to love it again. And that can mean many things. It can mean choosing someone who you love to listen to and listen to their explanation of the Quran. Or it can mean starting a new class somewhere. Or it can mean starting a small halaqah where you read the Quran together. It can mean anything, but learning to love the Quran again. I mean, many people learn to love the Quran through tajweed classes, but it doesn't work for everyone. Like sometimes it has to be just reading one ayah a day, but learn to love the Quran again. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Asma, for answering the questions and all the amazing tips that you provided for us today. Last question that I have from one of our audiences that we will close our discussion with. Could you talk about your credentials and your educational journey and experience to get to where you are today as a psychotherapist with an Islamic perspective? Also, people are asking for your social media or just contact information to contact you for further consultation.
Sure. So
yeah, just briefly if you would like to answer that.
Okay. I think I'll answer the first. With the second, is it possible for you to post it?
Yes, we can post that actually. If you could write it in the chat in here for us, we will post it on Facebook.
Sure. Let me see how to. The screen is minimized, so I can't see the chat. Let me see. There it is. Okay, I've just put the website and Instagram handle. Okay, so I think the first question is interesting. A lot of people ask that because they're interested in the field of psychotherapy, and I think it's a wonderful field. I love it, and I'm happy to share that. If you're curious about me, I started my career as a teacher. So I did a BA, and then I did a B.Ed, and I started as a teacher. I taught for a couple of years. Then I left that to do a master's in education. And after that, I realized a growing need for psychotherapy amongst Muslims in my community. And that, coupled with my love for psychology, led me to do another, a master's in counseling psychology. And then I trained for 2 years or so. And then after that, I started a practice, and I've been practicing since. In the last year or so, I did a degree in Islamic counseling with Aleph Institute in the UK. And that degree is basically, it is premised on the idea that everything that is healing is from Allah, because it's good. And its healing is from Allah, and it's Islamic in that sense, right? So the Aleph degree is based in Islam. The model is based in our understanding of the human being, including things like the ruh, the nafs, and so on. However, with that basic foundation, we're welcome to bring in Western psychotherapeutic approaches. So we have this understanding, and then we bring those approaches in. And the goal of Islamic psychotherapy is to bring a person back to their true purpose in life which in the Aleph model is good character. And even more essential to that is love, is loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, loving ourselves, and loving creation. So that's what I did in the Aleph model, in the Aleph program.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Asma, for sharing your journey. And hopefully people that are looking to go in the same career field as you, got some tips, and inshallah, it will be helpful for them as well. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for giving us your time today. We will close today's program, inshallah. I just have some last closing announcements to make. And after the closing announcements, we will have a last closing dua by Sister Rabia here again. So I just want to remind our audience that the programs that we're having the next few weeks will be in the celebration of Islamic History Month. We have a drop point session coming up. Inshallah, we have a drop point session that's going to be on October 18th. This is the last leadership session of, for our audience that are following with this session. October 18th will be our last session, so make sure that you attend this session in order to be able to receive your certificate. We also have our legacy tour at Sunday, October 17th. You can register for all these programs at tanbm.com, or you can contact us on social media if you have any questions. We have our Leader Summit as well. That's going to be October 18th. The times are different. It's around 1 p.m. Eastern time for this program. So we do have a few events on the same date, but different timing. Please make sure that you register for all of them and follow us on social media. We have our annual Quran competition. So for this competition will be on October 31st. Young girls and women ages of 5 above could register for this program. Make sure that you register for this competition ahead of time, please. You can find all the details at tanbm.com. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and inshallah we'll see you guys in the next program, and we'll have Rabia to close the program right now. Thank you. I think there is a technical difficulty with Rabia's computer. Rabia? Okay, thank you everyone. Have a great day. Inshallah, we'll see everyone next time. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Take care.